Okay, so our lesson for today, and the thing you're going to be playing with today is AJAX. AJAX allows us to make HTTP requests with JavaScript in the background on our web page. So if we go to a page, and John talked a little bit about this last week, but if we go to YouTube, so first let's talk about an HTTP request. We've been doing that, first of all, you've been doing that yourself for years, because that's what we do every time we type an address into the browser and press enter. It makes an HTTP request. The browser is just a GUI, a graphical user interface that helps us make HTTP requests. It does a bunch of other things for us too. It's like, but it's just a piece of software that does that. We do not need the browser to make those requests. In fact, we were making them through the terminal with curl. If you remember, we had a assignment or whatever last, I think, was it last? John, you were messing with it, right?
Yeah, it was last week.
It was last week. We were using curl to make an HTTP request. The browser is just a big fancy program that makes HTTP requests for us, and then does a bunch of other cool things too, and allows us to run JavaScript, right? But all we really need to make the HTTP request is the URL, which is right here. Cool. So there are two types of requests that we're going to talk about today. One is a GET. So you're going to, we'll start talking more about the idea of HTTP verbs. So when we make an HTTP request, and in fact, let's look at it right here. So I can click on network here. And I'm going to make this request again. So all of this right here, these are all requests that are being made to YouTube server, right? All of this stuff that we're grabbing. And we have a couple of different things here. We have the URL. We have the status code. Do you guys remember what 200 means?
Okay.
Oh, 200 means okay. Type, blah, 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 blah. The thing I want to do is click on this, not double click on it. Just click on it once. And so we're going to get this thing headers right here, right? When we make a request, what the browser is doing underneath is it's actually sending this information to YouTube, right? Or request response headers, yeah. So it's sending this. It's setting the request method, which we can see right here as get. We get our status code. There's a whole bunch of information here. We're not going to go through every single thing. And you can see there's a bunch of them. What I really want to point out is this method get right here, okay? So the two forms of HTTP requests that we're going to talk about today are get and post. Get is exactly what it sounds like. Get me some information. Just go get it and bring it back to me. That's what's happening when we first visit most sites. We're just doing a get. Get that information and bring it to me. That's what we did here. We said, go get YouTube's homepage and bring it to me. We'll get to post in a little bit, but let's just focus on get. So we send this header over. We get back this page. And so now you might notice on Twitter, Facebook, a lot of pages have this thing where if I scroll to the bottom, I get to the bottom, and then we saw that really quick. There's this little load icon right down here, right? You see this little gray circle? And the more I scroll down, it looks like I get to the bottom, and then it stops. Or I mean, and then it loads more, and it loads more, and it loads more. This is a concept you probably heard of called infinite scroll. And what's happening behind the scenes is every time I get to the bottom of the screen, JavaScript is making another HTTP request, very similar to what we type into the browser, and it's saying, go get me more information, right? It's getting that information and then updating the DOM, just like we did in our, just like we just did with the pizza, why can't I think of the name of assignment earlier? But we were getting our information that was already kind of in the div, right? We were getting information that was already in the div. Now we're getting it from an outside source. We parse it out, and then we update the DOM with it. That's all that's happening. Now, YouTube is doing that on a much grander scale and in a much more complex way, but that is essentially the idea. Does that make sense? So how they're doing this is with the technology, or how we are going to do this or start to learn how to do this is with a technology called AJAX, or jQuery AJAX, which allows us to make these HTTP requests with JavaScript and update the browser. Cool. So yeah, I just want to make that point one more time before we dive into the code, that essentially when I type an address in here, nothing very different is happening when I do that than when I scroll to the bottom and it reloads this. It's not doing it because I already scrolled to the bottom. But when I scroll down here, it's still making that same, we just can't see it. But it's still calling back out to YouTube and saying, get me more stuff. Cool? All right, let's take a look at some code. Nope, that's from before. I think I already had something set up here. Cool. All right, so we're gonna take baby steps because this is gonna end up being a lot of code, but it'll be easy to understand. I think it'll be easy to walk through. But we're gonna build this up. Okay, so first let's just quickly walk through the code that we already have right here. I have a very small HTML page. It just has a head and a body with one div in it. The head is reaching out and grabbing the jQuery library. And then it is also linking to the application JSON, which we have, or not JSON, application JavaScript file that we have right here. Cool? Similar to what we just did. Okay, over here, I have my document ready. And then if you remember from yesterday, this $sign, that just means I'm grabbing something from the jQuery library, right? That's like my indication that I'm grabbing something from jQuery. And jQuery is giving me this function right here called getJSON, which does exactly what it says. It gets JSON from an outside source. You pass it a URL, and it brings it back, right? Have we talked about JSON yet? What JSON is? JSON, what does it stand for? I always forget. It's like JavaScript object notation. Stands for JavaScript object. I was right. JavaScript object notation. JSON is just a standard for sending data over the internet, right? There's a couple of different standards. JSON is one of them. When we send data over the internet, we're sending it just as a string. So it's important that we format it in a way so when I get it, you know what I mean? I can anticipate how it's going to be formatted. Because if it's just like a jumble of text with no indication of how, like where one thing starts and one thing ends, then it's impossible to parse, right? JSON's a very popular notation for that. And really, it's called JSON because it looks and acts a lot like a JavaScript object. Or another version of it was a Ruby hash, right? It's basically just key value pairs. And we'll see an example of it in a minute. But just so you know, JSON is a thing you're going to see and be messing with a lot. So it's important to start to understand what it is and where it came from. Cool. So we are using getJSON. We're calling out to this website. This is just a website that has basically like practice data. If you ever just need quick data, someone set up this website to do this. This is another one down here, but I think we're going to use this one. This one returns, full disclosure, a lot of like left-leaning liberal stuff. It's just a quick one. That's why we're using it. Code Platoon is taking no stances with this information. It's just something that we can pull from really quick and get information back. Cool, so it's gonna do that. And then we're gonna pass it a function. So this is a little bit, again, we're seeing the same pattern from when we were doing our, we were putting our event listeners, right? We're saying this is like a JavaScript thing to pass this callback function, right? Do this after this thing is done, right? Before we were saying after they click, run this function. Now we're saying after you receive a response from this URL, run this function with the response. So that's what this is right here. We get this response thing. We could call this whatever we want as long as we call it the same things here and here. But essentially we'll get a response. And then down here, we are doing what we've already done before. We're grabbing this div response data. We're appending, we're not appending, we're just replacing the HTML, which is just what's gonna be in here. And then we're using this JSON.stringify, which just takes the response and turns it into a string, I believe. Cool? All right, so let's see this work. It's not going to be the most amazing thing, but. All right, cool, it popped up over here. Cool, and so this is what we got. So you can see it looks like a Ruby hash. It looks like a JavaScript object. We have our curly braces, and then we have our key value pairs, IP, and then the value about, blah, 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 all of this liberal stuff. Cool? Oh, my God. Great. Questions about this concept of using JavaScript to, I can blow this up a little bit, too. Using JavaScript to make these HTTP requests. So all that's happening is this page loaded. Then once the document was loaded, we run this get JSON. It makes this HTTP request. It returns a response. We grab this div from the DOM, and then we update it with the response. Cool. Questions? Okay. Sweet. All right, so let's move on to this next part of this. Sorry, one second. I've lost my notes. Let's just grab this one right. All this code I'm using today, too, is in your curriculum, which is on purpose, because if you want to go back and play with the code or use the code, it is there for you. So, cool. Okay, so now we have this concept of getting the data. So following this pattern that you're going to do probably over and over and over again, we're going to get data. And right now we're displaying it. And for us, it kind of makes sense because we've seen stuff like this before. But for a user, this is useless to them, right? This is just gibberish. So we need to parse the data in a way that is meaningful to people. And we have had experience parsing data before. We were parsing those CSV files, right? Again, that was another situation where it was important that the data was structured in a way that we could anticipate, right? The CSV file was comma-separated values. We knew that the values were separated by commas that allowed us to parse it in a certain way. That's why it's so important to know what you're getting back. Am I getting JSON back? Am I getting some other format back, right? That's how I know how to, and that's why these standards exist. So we know we're getting JSON. We know it behaves a little like an object or like a JavaScript object or a Ruby hash. So I'm just going to copy this so you don't have to watch me type all this out. But let's grab this here, and then I'll talk through it. OK. So we're doing basically the same thing here. We've just added another thing. One, you'll notice the document.ready has disappeared. This is actually shorthand jQuery. This is the exact same thing. Still doing the same thing. We've just removed the document ready, but wrapping everything in this $ parentheses is doing the same thing for us, okay? So we're still waiting for our document to load. We're still getting JSON from the same place, doing all this stuff. We've added this line 4. This jQuery.each is a jQuery method that will parse the response for us. Pretty similar to Ruby.each. JavaScript also has its own array method for each and some other array methods that we'll talk about later. But we're just going to use this jQuery one because it's there and we can use it. So we pass the response that we want to loop through. This is just looping through each key value pair, something we've done a dozen times before. And then we give it a function. What do we want it to do as we loop through, right? I believe this is the key, and then this is the value. And then we're doing the same thing as before. We are grabbing something called response data, and we are appending li to it. Now, where do we usually put these LIs? Not in a div, right? In an unordered list. Yeah, absolutely. So let's actually make that over here. Actually, let's just change this into an unordered list. Cool. So one more time, just so we can anticipate what we're getting. We'll get this response object back. We saw what that looked like. This hash-ish thing, object thing. We will loop through each key value pair. We will take just the value, and you can see this is old notation. How would we refactor this real quick to update it to the newer JavaScript? This interpolation here. My bad. I'm not being clear.
You just need to get rid of the inside quotes, get rid of the plus signs.
Yeah.
Add a $ and curly brackets around the item.
Absolutely. We're not going to do this every time because it's going to get tedious because this is coming right from the curriculum, which is cool. And then what do I got to do to item?
$, curly bracket.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Sorry. That was just bugging me.
Do we have quotes around everything?
We have the ticks, the back ticks. Yeah, so that's the thing, and that took me forever to remember too. In JavaScript, if we want to interpolate, we use these back ticks. In Ruby, we're using the quotes, double quotes. Cool. So, so we're looping through our response. We're taking just the value, which we're labeling item. We could call this anything, but we're labeling it item. We're grabbing our unordered list response data, and we're appending an li to it. So we're looping through this, so we expect to see something for each value. So let's go back, refresh this page, and there we go. So now we have a list. This was what? The IP address, the about, this was the body. Cool? All right, questions so far? Okay. Okay, so we've been making these requests with GetJSON, which is one. There are many ways to make these requests. GetJSON is one. We're about to do AJAX, which is another. A newer JavaScript function that we'll probably look at later in the cohort, but not today, is fetch. And that behaves a little bit differently than the AJAX one, so we'll do that one later. But just so you know, there are many ways to do this concept. And again, I said this yesterday, you might not use jQuery. You might not use AJAX directly, but this idea of making HTTP requests behind the scenes, essentially, is extremely important, no matter what exact technology you're using for it, right? Cool. So we have this idea. Now we're going to change, and we're going to use AJAX. And again, I'm just grabbing this from your curriculum, and we'll talk through it. Okay, so we have something a little bit. So the GetJSON is pretty generic. It just grabs stuff, right? It doesn't really allow us any other functionality. It grabs stuff. If there's an error, there's not really a way to handle it. AJAX is more robust. It gives us more options. And you can see right here our first one, right? So again, we have our document ready. We just have the shorthand for it. Now, instead of using get JSON, we're doing AJAX. We're making this a request to the same place. But now you can see right here, instead of passing a function directly, what we're in, I don't want you to worry too much about this, but just so you know what's going on, these curly braces right here, and I think they're closing here, here and here. This is an object. We're passing a JavaScript object, right? And a JavaScript object can hold values, and it can also hold functions. That's kind of a unique thing about, or different thing about JavaScript compared to Ruby, right? And this AJAX function, it knows, it has built in, it knows what to do when you pass it an object and you set one of the keys to success and you give it a function. Like, it's expecting that, right? So what we're saying here is when you go to this URL, if you are successful, if you receive something back, then run this function. And we're doing exactly the same thing as before. This switch back, I'm not going to switch it again, but just know that I am aware that this is not the right way to do this anymore. Cool? Cool, let's try this out. So are there questions on this? So really all we've done right now so far is we've added this success part. Cool? Otherwise we have the same thing. Let's load it. Oh. It broke. Why did it break?
Probably the append is probably.
The append? What's wrong with the append?
I don't know. I can't see. But that, I mean, you didn't change anything else, right?
I don't know. Did I?
Yeah. What are we're not appending to address, are we? There's no ID called address.
Oh, there's no ID called address. Does everybody see that? We are appending. So right here, we're grabbing something called address that does not exist anywhere in here, right? Good catch, good catch. So there are two ways to solve this. We can change this one to address, or we can change this one to response data. I think response data makes more sense, so I'm going to change it to response data. Cool. Let's go back. And there we go. So far, same thing, right? Not a lot has changed. But you're going to see this grow, okay? And the things that we can do grow. So what if we make a call to a URL, I want this data, and nothing comes back, or an error comes back, right? Or something I did not anticipate comes back. Right now, I'm not handling that at all. And so there's no way for me to react to that. There's no way for me to let my user know that something went wrong. So AJAX allows us to, again, let's grab this. This is just to save you guys from having to watch me type all this. Cool. So again, this is all the same up here. All we've added is from line 8 down. So again, we have success. We set that to this function. Cool. On success, run this function. Then we have a comma here, and then we have another key for our object, which is error, and we give that a function. And essentially, we're just saying if there is an error, so if there's a success, do this. If there's an error, run this function. And if there is an error, we get all of these things for free. These all come with it, right? So we'll get a request, a copy of the request we made. We will get an error type if one is provided, and we'll get an error message if there is one, right? I do not think that this API that we're calling out to is going to give us an error message, so it might be blank. But this, I believe, and I'm sure someone will love proving me wrong if it is wrong, but I believe this error message would come from the server, but I might be wrong. Okay. So then we're running this alert function. Did we use the alert before? It just pops up an alert box when you call this. This is just JavaScript. This is not a jQuery thing. And then we're interpolating basically everything we get back, our error type and error message. Cool?
Can you hear me?
Hello?
You can just, to test the error thing, you can just basically disconnect from the network and then run it and see what happens.
That is true. We could disconnect from the network and see what happens. But I know when I run it this time, nothing's going to happen, even connected to the network. So I'm not Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I just wanted people to see like how it works.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I think that's a good point, for sure. Okay, so first we're gonna run this.
Same issue.
Same issue, right? Oh man. Address, right? It was fun the first time, now it's just annoying. Cool. Great. Oh, well, no matter what, right? Because we're succeeding every time. So we're not gonna hit this. So just to test this, let's change this to not a URL ever Josh blah blah blah. If this is actually a website, I will be amazed. Cool. Sweet. So we got an error. Oh, we did get our error message. Cool. I don't know why it didn't work before. So we have error, error with message, syntax error, failed to execute, blah, 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 blah. Invalid URL, essentially, right? And again, that all came from here, from our error message. Cool. Questions on the error messages? Cool. We're going to build in some more things here. So just recapping, again, we are grabbing data. If we get that data back, we do something with it, right? In this case, we parse it, then we display it to the user. If we do not get anything back, or if there is some sort of error, we can grab the error and react to that. There are a couple of other things AJAX allows us to do. This is our last part here. Cool. So now we've added 2 more things. There were 3 more things. First, there's this timeout. This basically says if you make this request, and so we're passing it to, this is in milliseconds, I believe, 2000 milliseconds, which is 2 seconds, I think. If you make this request and you don't get anything back in 2 seconds, then throw an error, right? Then stop. And the reason for that is it could wait forever and ever and ever. And there is a lot of data on this, and John is more knowledgeable about this than I am. But there's like a limited time someone will tolerate being on your website waiting for stuff to happen. And I believe it is around 2 seconds, right? If you're not reacting within so many seconds, they will move on to another website, right? And so what you want to do is catch stuff like that. So you want to say, if I'm trying to make this, if for some reason this server is down or it's not returning what I want or the network is too slow, I want to move on to something else to keep the user there. So that's what this timeout is doing. Then we can also set something to happen before before the response comes back, and something to happen right when it's completed, right? So that's what we're adding here. So the first thing we're doing here is, again, we're setting this, and then we're just giving it a function to run. We're saying grab something called loading, append an H4 to it that just says loading text. I'm sorry, that has a class loading text and just says loading. That's what happens before. And then when it's complete, we're just going to remove that H4, or essentially all H4s, but we're only going to have one on the page. This isn't going to work yet. Why not?
Because we haven't changed the address to response type.
Okay, well, yes, that is part 1. Damn it.
Just kidding.
No. That is definitely part of it. But for a very similar reason, we're not going to see this.
Because it's going to pull it in the amount of time that it needs to.
Because it's going to pull it. Well, actually, you are probably right. This will probably happen so fast, this right here, that this before thing will fire and we probably will have a hard time seeing it. I'm going to try to do something so that we can see it. But there's another reason why this H4 isn't going to show up.
Where is this loading ID?
That's a great question. Where is the loading ID? So let's put something. I think we can just do a div. that looks good, right? Cool. So we'll put it up here. Okay. So we are going to run this page. It will wait for the document to load. It will grab this, or it will go make a GET request to this URL. If it is successful, it will parse everything and display it. If there's an error, it will show us the error in an alert box. If it takes more than 2 seconds, it will error. Before it comes back, it will run this. This will probably happen so fast we won't see it. And then when it comes back, it will remove it. So let's check that out. Let's see what happens. Cool. Did you see loading really quick? Happened very quickly. Yeah, it's like happening so fast. There is a way. Let me see. Yeah, so the dev tools allow you, see right here, we have slow 3G, fast 3G. This is to allow you to mimic different user experiences to see how your page would perform. So we'll try slow 3G and see if that slows it down enough for us to see loading. Oh, that really slowed it down. Yeah. Oh, and it actually ended up taking so long that it timed out. So that was great because it worked out. Cool. So does everybody understand why we hit this? We ended up, we were loading because this was happening before any response came back. The response took longer than 2 seconds, so we didn't even finish it. We end up getting this alert box. Cool? All right, cool. Are there questions about this so far? Cool. I am going to pause the video. Zoom recording. Okay, we are back. Hopefully we are recording again. We took a quick break. So we finished talking about all the different pieces of using AJAX to make a GET request. Let me pull that back up. I don't know why does this keep going over here? Cool, so we had all our different parts. Here's where we're making our GET request. Again, just get me some information. We can handle the success, we can handle the error, we can do something beforehand, and we can do something after we get that. So the other HTTP verb that I want to talk about today is post. And that's when we want to change data or make some sort of change to something on the server, right? So this is what's happening. It's exactly what it sounds like. When you post something on Facebook, when you post something on Twitter, that's what's happening. A post request is being made. So it'll make a little bit more sense. We'll walk through it, and I'll talk to you about like how it's going to go. We're going to change our HTML here.
Where is the post? I don't see post anymore.
It's not there yet. I will tell you in 1 second. We're going to change our HTML, and we are also going to change our JavaScript. I will walk you guys through this. Don't worry. Just let me get this set up. Cool. So let's talk about what we have here. Over here we have a form. Forms are pretty much how we get data from our user and we send it off to the server, right? The kind of traditional way that this is done is like we'll have a form. It'll have an input field. It might have a dozen input fields. It might have one input field. And the user will fill that out. That's where we'll get our information. Maybe they write a blog post. Maybe they write a tweet. Maybe they just enter their names, right? It depends on what we want. And then we will have a button to submit the form. When we submit the form, there are a couple different ways that we can send that data off. I believe we can put an attribute right in the form right here that tells it what URL to go to, and it'll just go, right? The reason we're not going to do that, the reason we want to use AJAX to do this instead, is if we do that and we submit the form that way, our page will reload, right? It will make a post request. When it gets to this, and this will make more sense when we start doing more server-side stuff, but it'll go to the server, it'll update something, and then it'll probably send back a redirect, which will redirect us to a new page, right? You don't have to fully understand that. Just know that the page will reload if we do it that way. And we want to avoid the page reload, right? You've seen this probably on Twitter when you, if you tweet something or anything, even like just like if you make a comment on a blog post, now it's much more common. It used to be that the whole page would have to reload so that your comment could be added to the bottom, right? If you had a post and then like 5 comments and then you commented on the bottom, the whole page would reload, which means that there was a GET request, which means that they would post, so there would be a request that would send your comment to the server. It would update the database. Then it would grab that whole page again with your updated comment, and it would send you back the blog post, all those other comments, and your comment again, right? All this needless traversal, right, or back and forth. Instead, we just want to update that one thing that changed. So when we do this with AJAX, when we make the post request with AJAX, we're saying, don't reload the whole page. Just send off this information. We're going to grab it from the form, right? Just send that information, and then we will update the page just in that one place, like we've been doing before. Does that make sense? So we're avoiding this whole page reload, and we're just tacking something onto the bottom. Cool? Okay. Let's see. So we are going to mimic this because we do not have a server set up, and we don't really have a way to like actually make a post. There's a site that allows us to mimic this behavior, and there's actually a link to it in, if you want to play with it later, there's a link to it here in your curriculum, but this is basically it. Cool. So it's going to give us this like kind of this little playground to play with. So it's going to give us this URL. So we can now make post requests to this URL here. And we can define down here what we want to happen, essentially, when we make this request. So I know we haven't gotten to how to make the request yet. We'll get to that in a second. I just want to set this up. Say response.status. What is the status? Let's just say that it's good. So what's the OK status?
200.
200. So we'll send back a response of 200. What else do we want to do? I want to put it, I think we want to give it some headers. I'm going to copy this over here. Cool. This is just saying that the content type that we're going to send back is JSON. And then we're going to do response.body. This is basically where we can send back any information that we want. This is like if we were going to get back the comment or something like that. This is where it would be. Again, in a JSON, this key value pair here. Let's do something a little bit more than okay. Let's just do like we did it. Okay, cool. So this is what we're hoping to get back. We are not going to save it like that. That was wrong. Okay, cool. Okay. I haven't used this thing in a while, so let's make sure this works. Cool. Okay, so let's go back to our code and look at what we have set up here. We have quite a bit going on. Oh, first, let's just make sure our form is loading on the page. Cool. Okay, so here's our very, very lame form, right? It just has submit comment.
Why did that button just move when you press it?
Yeah, I don't know what that was about. I'm not really, do you see all this weirdness going on here? Is that showing up there or just on my computer?
Why?
I don't know, there's just a bunch of weird shit happening. I don't know why that button just did that, John. It looked like it loaded styles. It loaded some style.
Okay.
I'm not really sure why it did that. Okay, so here's our comment. Okay, it does nothing right now. Let's walk through the JavaScript here. So once again, we have our document ready. The first thing that we're doing is we're grabbing our comment form, which is we have an ID here for it. So this is grabbing this entire form with jQuery. We're putting an event listener on it. This one is called submit. I think you could also just do on and then put submit in quotes in there too, but I'm not sure. But this is cleaner, so we can use submit. We're saying when you submit, run this function. So let's talk about this E right here. When we have an event listener, an event gets triggered, right? We have access to that event as an object. It becomes like an object, a thing that we can get information from, and we can console log it and just see what it looks like. It'll look kind of weird, but let's see. Let's see what it gives us. What's up? Did I spell it wrong? Yes, I did. Log. Thank you. Oh, that's right, because we're doing that. Maybe not. I don't know. I'm not sure why it's not showing us the event. What'd you say?
So we're log function, got the function.
Log on submit.
Also dot log.
Did the console log work? I didn't see.
No, it didn't.
It did not.
Yeah, I'm not sure why actually.
Comment form.
It's not super important, but I am a little confused why we can't log it and see the event. I don't know. Comment form, submit. Should be able to do it because we have the event default here. Oh well. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Can you put a console log above that, just in function? See what
Above here?
Yeah.
What is your thinking on this?
I just want to see if this is actually running.
That's a great question.
It is not.
Yeah, you're right. We got a problem here. Oh, what is our problem? Oh my God.
Yeah.
What is our problem? Why is none of this running? I can't believe I missed this.
You got it. Is that an open tag?
Where?
No.
No. Look at our HTML.
It's not.
We have no head.
Yeah.
I completely got rid of the head when I copied this over. So we are not loading our JavaScript file in at all. Right? Seems obvious now, right? Seems obvious now. Okay, let me just grab that back. It's like a Monday. Where'd that go? Here we go. Completely deleted the head. There we go. Cool. See, I'm glad I console logged because I found this out. All right, let's go back. There's hello, and there's our event, and we get some error. Oh, because we're doing cross origin. That's something else. Here's our event right here. So you see, it looks kind of like an object. We have a type, submit. We have all these attributes and functions that we can call, all this information that we get from the event. We can get this client X, client Y. Like when an event is triggered, there's all sorts of stuff that the browser grabs. Like I think you can get like the location of the mouse when that event was triggered, stuff like that, right? So just a good thing to know, not a thing you need to dive super into right now, but a good thing to know. So when we click submit on a form, its default behavior is to make and it's not going to do it because I don't think it's going to do it because we didn't pass it anywhere to go. But its default behavior, I believe, is to make the HTTP request and to reload the page, right? So what we want, that's what this e.prevent default is doing. It's saying when the event is triggered, prevent the default behavior, essentially, so that we can run this JavaScript instead. Cool? All right. So let's walk through this. I know you guys are probably eager to get to work, so this will be our last thing. Great. We're grabbing our comment form. We're putting this event listener on it. We are going to grab so comment is this actual input right here, the thing that the user is going to type their comment into. Serialized is just a function, I believe it's a jQuery function, that's just going to take the comment and put it into a key value pair, kind of get it ready to send, right? Just gets our data ready to send. We save that to form data. We prevent the default behavior. Let's see. We change the button to gray. So this is just changing an attribute. Let's see. What do? We put send. We append sending to, or we change the HTML to sending. Then we have our AJAX request, right? And so it's okay. We don't have to like dive into these things, but it's important to notice like all of these things that are happening when we do this, right? All of these little things that get updated to make the user experience more seamless. You know, we saw YouTube was loading that like rolling gray circle. That's just like an image, like an animation that they're loading. That's probably like loaded this dot, append this thing until this other thing happens. So you're seeing some patterns here. Then we're calling AJAX. We're making this AJAX call a little bit differently than we did before. Before we were just passing it a URL because by default it will just do the GET request, but we don't want to do a GET request. We want to do a post. We want to make some change, right? So async, true. What does asynchronous mean?
It syncs together.
It's actually the opposite, right? They don't have to happen at the same time, right? So that's what JavaScript is kind of allowing us to do, right? We can update the page. It can make the request and then update the page all by itself, right? Cool. The type is, this is where our method goes.
What is exactly asynchronous here? The post request and the update?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. The URL, we haven't filled this in yet, but this is where we want to make the post to. The data that we're sending is this variable up here on line 3. We're just throwing it down here. This whole thing is just a JavaScript object, right? Key value pairs. Cool. Data type is text. Cross domain, that just means that we are going away. We're going to a different source for this information. So we have to specify that. Usually that's kind of a no-no. Usually you don't want to do that. Like YouTube is making these requests to another YouTube server to update it, right? We're going to a different website. We're going to this, whatever it was. Where did it go? To this puts request website. So we need to specify that. Then we have the same kind of thing here. On complete, we're going to run this function, which will take this div, where is it? Submit comment, and remove this attribute, which will change, I think, change its color, right? Back to black. We give it a function to run if there's an error. We give it a function to run if there's a success. Cool. So let's run this, see what happens, and then we can come back and check out the code, okay? Hopefully this works. Okay, see, so we had a problem here.
Do we need to put in the URL?
Yes, thank you. That is exactly what we need to do. That's why it's not working. Okay, so this is where we can make our post to. So this website sets this up for us, and I think I need to build this thing up again too. Luckily, I saved it over here. Requests. We'll just send back okay. That's fine. Grab this. So far, we've made no request. We've had no requests. We'll put our URL in here. We'll So we saw our error was working, right? From before. Where did that go? Nope. Cool. Hello. Sending.
Refresh.
Thank you. Oh, good. Save my comment. Comment sent successfully. And we can come over here and see that we had one request. Cool.
Where is it? Where's the hello?
It was like sent here and posted here. I don't know why it's not sending it back. Let's look at the code. So it's in the form data.
You never.
Yeah, so I think what's happening here is we're just posting. Usually you would post, send the post, that would update your database. And then on the server, it would send the comment back as, or you could, you could append it right here. You could immediately append it. But if you wanted to make sure that it was saved first before you made any update to the DOM, you would have it sent back as JSON. Right. So the thing that we're seeing here, the point here is just that we can all, before we were getting data, this is how we can send data to the server, right? This is how we're sending data, is with this post request. This will become, the usefulness of this will become clearer too, I think, as you do your challenges today. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Cool. Are there any other questions about AJAX? I know that was quite a lot. All of this information is in, all the code that I used is in your curriculum. So you can take a second look at it if you want to, including some even more in-depth explanations of a lot of these things. So I would encourage you to read over it before you get started today. The big takeaways are we can make HTTP requests. We can request information behind the scenes with JavaScript. So that's how we can update the DOM without the user really knowing what the hell we're doing. We can also post data without having to reload the entire page. We can send data to the server to update or create a new resource. And that will come into play a lot more when we start doing the server-side stuff. And then just this idea of getting data, parsing, figuring out what you want, and displaying it to the user. Those are all the big things, okay? AJAX and jQuery give us a lot of tools to do that. There are also ways to do a lot of that stuff with vanilla JavaScript, which we'll talk about going forward, and you'll probably stumble upon yourself. Are there any other questions? Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording here.